Hello there! This is XIII of geekhammer.co.uk. You join us again for another video walkthrough. This time we're looking at the first form of Orphan, the final boss in the game Final Fantasy XIII. Okay, you can see the very first thing Orphan does is to hit you with his most powerful attack. Nice of him to show it to you straight away. Now, the problem with this attack is, as you can see, it is nothing more than just a shit ton of damage. No status effects or anything like that, just pure DPS through and through. You actually get a very brief moment to act before Orphan launches this attack for the first time, in which you can change paradigms. You'll want to have a very defensive paradigm set up to be able to absorb this attack. Either 2 sentinels and a medic, or 2 medics and a sentinel. The big problem with this attack isn't the damage itself that it does, because if, like me, you've got the reprieve skill, you can survive it virtually every time. The problem comes from the secondary attacks which come after it, especially if he's in Consummate Darkness. You've got very little HP, so if he sneezes you're going to be dead. We'll talk about paradigms and defences in a minute though. First of all, I'd like to discuss the boss's basic stances. You have Consummate Light, which is the one he's in at the moment, and Consummate Darkness. Consummate Light you can tell because there's a little white orb floating there in the centre of the screen, and Consummate Darkness there is a black orb on the opposite side. During Consummate Light, the orb will regularly cast healing spells on the boss. You don't need to worry too much about these, so long as you're keeping doing damage on Orphan, the effect is minimal. Any stance that you adopt should always have at least a commando in there to keep the DPS up. At the very least they should be able to cancel out the effects of Consummate Light. Consummate Darkness is very similar, except instead of the orb healing the boss, it will attack one of your party members for roughly the same damage. Consummate Darkness is definitely the more awkward of the two because it keeps up a constant, steady stream of damage which wears down your hit points slowly but surely. It's really irritating because individual attacks don't do quite enough to warrant special attention, but after about 10 to 30 seconds the damage really does rack up and you need to drop down into healing paradigms. Okay, basic strategies. Once you've got over the initial attack, make sure that you're healed up and then start buffing. You can see there he's just used Progenital Wrath. I'll talk about that in a moment. You might want to jump back into the video at that point when I mention it so you can actually see how that works. Once you've got the buffs up, you can also try debuffing Orphan as well. It doesn't work particularly effectively. You'll see earlier in this video I brought up his stats using Libra. Feel free to go back and have a look at that. You can see which status effects he's immune to and which he isn't. I believe D-Shell, D-Protect and Imperil are all possibilities. If you can get them off, by all means try, because it'll help you 5-star the boss. That Progenital Wrath deals a small amount of damage, but also has quite a strong possibility of actually one-shotting your character and basically just causing instant death. I found it doesn't work that often. It worked on Hope there, and that's one of only 2 times I've seen it in the 3 times that I've fought this boss. And it's one time it did, however, get my party leader. I've heard that there are certain ways that you can equip items which you can give your party leader a 93% resistance to death, but personally I prefer using those items to actually make sure that my characters are all ubermensch. Loads of damage, loads of hit points, loads of defense, the usual stuff, and I just leave the whole thing with the actual death to chance. There's only a 1 in 3 chance he'll target your party leader, and an even smaller chance that that attack will actually kill the party leader. So, all in all, don't worry about it. You saw there that there was another attack, the Chains of Torment. That was about 30 seconds ago. It deals a small amount of damage, but also inflicts some very nasty status effects, including pain and silence. I know it's not called silence in this game, but let's call a spade, shall we? There's not much you can do about them, except for end sooner, and of course if you have any items, try to use those as well. On this topic, potions are your best friend. If you're using offensive paradigms, such as Relentless Assault, which don't have a healer, you can use a potion in between each time your ATB gauge fills, just to help keep your party topped up slightly. That's a great help as well when the boss uses Consummate Darkness. As a point, Merciless Judgment is the trigger for the change in stance. Whenever he changes stance, he'll switch from either he'll either switch from the light stance to the dark stance. Whichever one is currently active, he'll switch to the other one. Again, as the battle wears on, keep your buffs up. I have the protection paradigm for that because it lets me heal and also allows me to get my buffs back up at the same time. I also have the Supremacy paradigm, which is very useful for making sure that your party is buffed to hell and back, as well as helping you to debuff the enemy. Again, debuffing Orphan is very difficult, but if you can pull it off, it's definitely worth it. We go the superiority paradigm that I just mentioned. You can see I just got one of the debuffs off there, always useful. Key buffs here are haste, which is important in any boss fight. Protect is also very important, and shell. Faith and bravery are very useful if you can get them, but it's the defensive paradigms that you want. Now, none of Orphan's attacks, bar the Merciless Judgment, are actually particularly dangerous. The Chains of Torment are an issue, but not a real problem, just so long as you've got a stock of items or a character who can cast them sooner. The Progenital Wrath, like I've said, is probably best ignored. Your defensive paradigms should consist of either 2 medics and a sentinel, or 2 sentinels and a medic. And so long as you've got that to actually absorb the Merciless Judgment strikes, you should be fine. The big problem with Merciless Strike is, unlike most bosses' big attacks, it's not telegraphed. And because it's not telegraphed, you can't just instantly jump into the defensive paradigms. That means you either need to try and anticipate when the boss is going to shift, which as far as I can tell is impossible because there's no pattern, or you always need to have a sentinel in place to absorb the hurt, which means that your DPS is going to suffer or your healing is going to suffer. There is a compromise to this, which is if you have the reprieve, you know that Merciless Judgment will never kill you. So long as your hit points are fairly high, I think above about 50%, it cannot hurt you. Then you can jump into the defensive paradigm, the Sentinel can make sure that the follow-up attacks don't kill you, and the medics can concentrate on getting you healed up. Now, the observant among you may have noticed that both the Consummate Light and Consummate Darkness orbs are now there. That usually happens when Orphan's at about half health. The precise point does vary, but it's round about half health. At this point, Merciless Judgment just comes in straight out of the blue at random. It can happen fairly frequently. Up until this point, it's been a fairly infrequent attack. So keep your health topped up, and either keep a Sentinel in place if you've not got Reprieve, or if you do have Reprieve, which, believe me, you should do at this point, just make sure that you're ready to jump into those defensive paradigms. When you want to go on the offensive, as always, Relentless Assault is good because it lets you stagger the enemy. When Orphan is staggered, he actually loses the orbs which are currently protecting him. And also, obviously, you can build up a large amount of damage, and also, if you can, use the 5 ATB gauge segment attacks. As a point, Merciless Judgment wipes out his chain gauge, as you can see from that attack there. You see there, I've jumped into my defensive paradigm, Hope's healing me up, Sars is replacing any buffs which were lost, and Fang is using Mediguard to keep her own hit points up to make Faith's job a little bit easier. Faith, Hope, Hope, Faith, he looks like a girl, we can give him a girl's name. Okay, we're nearing the end of this boss fight now, which is pretty good because I've run out of things to say. If you check the description of this video, you will find a link to a written version of this guide. That's also printable, so if you need a little thing next to you whilst you're going through the boss, feel free to go there and download and print that guide off. Beyond that, you just got to use the same basic principles that you've used with every other boss. Keep your buffs up, debuff the boss if you can, keep your HP above about 70%, and remember that you can't defend your way to victory. Use potions to keep your health up when you're in offensive paradigms, and that'll help you 5-star this boss. Again, 5-starring any of these endgame bosses doesn't get you anything special, so don't feel that you need to do it. That Vile Corruption attack is, again, not really a cause for concern. It leeches some health from your party members and passes it on to Orphan, but it's such a little amount that it actually heals him by comparing to the damage you're doing to him. Again, it really doesn't matter. So here we go, into Relentless Assault for the last big push. You can see I've got Imperil on him now as well as Deprotect. Well, I did have Deprotect. And he's staggered, and this will all be over now. As always, thanks for watching, and you can find more guides on the channel.